to speak up and touch so many people.
No,
That's
it's
true.
a sort of vacuum.
There
And
is a-
speak his mind rather than maybe what's expected.
Exactly, exactly. I think that's what his mind and what was in touch with his own
Yes,
faith,
regardless.
his
Right.
own faith structure,
Yeah.
and how he pivoted and was very open to saying, oh, I was wrong about this.
Yes,
And
that's
I-
a big thing.
Right.
Aha, and J. Edgar Hoover was launching pressure on him all the time. But it's interesting that the entire government of the country allowed both sides to function. We are not in that kind of situation now. Might be.
And he had that power on him all the time and still spoke what he regarded as the truth.
Yes, yes.
But he had an element against him
So-
with Billy Graham.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and that's a huge following, you know, and then I forget how that goes, but
Yeah,
he did pay
conservatives were
for it,
rising
but
up.
he didn't care. Yeah.
Excuse me, I want to jump in and mention, I just started the recording a little bit late. So for those who are watching a recorded version of this session, we are beginning today's spiritual enrichment with a reflection about Martin Doblmeier's documentary about Reinhold Niebuhr that we saw last week. We're spending about 10 minutes on that. Go ahead. Somebody else? What did you think about the film? By the way, I thought this would be a good film for us to see, because for people who think that Christianity and all its symbols, its concepts, its primary terms, such as grace, redemption, and so forth, if people think that those are obsolete or antiquated or irrelevant, Niebuhr reminds us that the resources of the Christian faith are powerful, and they can speak to individuals and an entire society, then and now. So that's why I thought the Niebuhr film would be helpful. I think his biographer, Robin Lovin, I think was his name, he specifically said Niebuhr took traditional Orthodox Christian terms and used them in his work as a public theologian to hold the powerful accountable. So Christianity could do it in mid-century, 20th century. I think Christianity has that same potential to be relevant in our public life today. That's why I showed the film.
And what was significant about it is he moved from the churches out into the public. Moved the message out from the churches into the public.
Exactly.
If he hadn't gotten Hoover and others of his sort excited, it wouldn't have made an impact that it did.
Right?
Interesting,
Maybe.
yes.
You got to have sparks to make the fire.
Good point.
I love that.
So that timeless element of his message, I think, is really what I agree with you said, and evidenced. I mean, when you look at Jean Valjean and Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, he seeking the overriding theme of redemption and society that right, and it parallels what's going on, just different, eras, and is very, very important to individuals and society.
Does it also include the lack of ambition? Because Niebuhr had I don't think he had any ambition. But, the evil folks, whatever. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we have a lot of Christian leaders in this country. They're just too busy making money to be what
That's right.
we're searching. What about Reverend Jesse Jackson? Does he speak
He writes. I don't know if he
Still?
gets out and speaks as much.
No, I know, just, a kind of
You know,
electoral.
I don't think,
Yeah, he's not well, you know.
do you think he's ambitious? Jesse Jackson?
You know,
I don't
yeah,
feel
right.
like the ambition
Yeah, I think
is
he
there.
has been very ambitious.
Sure, there's,
He's got a column in the
When you say
Sun-Times.
ambitious, you mean self,
Yes.
Focusing on himself.
Self-promoting.
and he represents only the black viewpoint. I think he does, not across the board.
Is there anybody at home who would like to offer a comment about the Niebuhr film? My fellow homestayers today?
This is Shelley. I'll be so bold as to comment because I wasn't participating last week, so I didn't see the film, but I did go and listen to the Mike Wallace interview of Reinhold Niebuhr, and I was absolutely blown away by how the same issues back then in the 60s are still percolating as being so socially divisive, and how articulate Niebuhr was about the separation of church and state. And this dealt primarily with the issue of choice. And he was very, very articulate and measured. And it was stunning how far we've drifted from that viewpoint. Thanks.
Any other reflections on the film last week?
pacifism, I'm glad that he brought that up. And I was happy because that's an important, not maybe pragmatic, but an important, very important topic.
Martin Doblmeier's film specifically contrasted, I think as Nancy Fox said, contrasted Reinhold Niebuhr with Billy Graham. And Billy Graham's interest was more in, he was a public figure, public religious figure, just like Reinhold Niebuhr, but his interest was more in individual or personal salvation, which is the even traditional evangelical focus. Reinhold Niebuhr took a much more social, universal, global kind of perspective about salvation, and that an entire nation, perhaps an entire world, needs to be, quote, saved. And that is in line with the social gospel movement, liberation theology, and so on, to take that kind of social view, that religion has something to say to the social order. And a lot of you back in October, when you gave me material about these 17 weeks, you were really, I think, hoping to help us find ways to distinguish our own kind of more liberal Protestant perspective from the evangelical perspective. And I think this film in that moment helps us understand that the whatever Christianity offers to the world, it can offer to the social systems and structures, even the politics of the world, boldly, without apology or reservation. And Reinhold Niebuhr showed us somebody who could do that.
Interesting distinction between having an influence on the national political scene as opposed to, say, adopting a religion as the national religion. I mean, there's the Islamists seem to see the world as you must adopt Islam or you're out. Well, certainly Niebuhr was not that way at all. It was,
right.
I think, acceptable with other religions and other perspectives.
What was Reinhold Niebuhr's number one goal for the United States of America? Not that it be Christian, but that it be just. As just as any society on earth could possibly be, because he realized there are limits to anything that is human. And that's what made him so brilliant. His goal wasn't to make people religious or Christian. It was to make people good, to make society work as well as it possibly can. So, but he shows us somebody, a great thinker who understands Christianity not as a project to get people to go to heaven when they die, but life on earth as best as it possibly can be.
I love his comment about, I think it was, man's inclination to justice makes democracy possible. Man's inclination to injustice makes democracy necessary.
That's a good-
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
so that speaks right into 2021, 2022, because
That's right.
some people say democracy is in peril in the United States of America.
Worldwide. Because it just isn't ours that's under threat from Trumpism, but all over the world, democracies are in threat. And
But ours is one in which we actually can make a difference.
yeah,
We have in the past, we should
Well, we
continue
need to
to.
make a difference this time because
Authoritarians have taken heart from Trumpism.
that's right.
We're no longer, the light on the hill that we used to be.
No.
Can we get it back? Maybe we can try.
We'll find out.
Um,
We'll find out in November.
Wait,
We'll find out next
oh.
November.
I don't think we can call it quits if November doesn't work out. I think we need to
Can never
keep
give
at
up.
it. We need to keep at
Hey,
it.
Hey, friends, I'd like to turn our conversation now to our topic for today, if that's okay.
Yes.
All right.
Today is the fourth Sunday of Advent, and Christmas is upon us. And I thought it would be good to use the balance of our time to reflect on two more things the Christian tradition offers, and that is story and concepts around Christmas. We know the stories of Christmas pretty well, the Bible stories found in Luke and Matthew. But out of those stories in the Bible come this very big idea called incarnation. And both the story and the concept or doctrine, if you will, of incarnation speak into us personally and into our community, the church, and also into the world, I hope. So I've got some things lined up for you here. I'd like to begin with a little video by Nadia Bowles-Weber. She's a pastor. She's the most tattooed pastor that you'll ever see.
It's so crazy that God would not spare God's self the indignity of something like hiccups or having a pancreas, right? I mean, there's like this fact that God became flesh, like this stuff, the stuff that disappoints us all the time, that sort of gets in the way and isn't like we think it should be and ages and gets fat and stops producing insulin, right? I mean, the ways in which our physical bodies can so fumble and disappoint us. And yet this is what God chose to have. That's incredible to me. And what does that then mean? That we have a human body, that this is God chose to make God's home within flesh. What does that mean for the fact that I have a human body? And then what does that mean for how much concern I might have for how any human body is treated or trafficked or abused, right? So this means something profound to humanity, that God chose to walk among us in flesh. That is powerful to me.
So here's our topic, incarnation. And if you want a definition, here's a literal definition. It means to be embodied in flesh or taking on flesh. And the more general religious definition of incarnation is the conception and birth of a sentient being who is the material manifestation of an entity, God, spiritual or universal force, whose original nature is immaterial. And by the way, Christianity isn't the only religion with the concept of incarnation. Hinduism is deeply embedded with the concept of incarnation, that God can be manifest not only in human beings, but also in rocks and rivers and trees and the earth itself. In Christian theology, which we're most about in this series, incarnation is typically defined as the embodiment of God, the Son, in human flesh as Jesus Christ. Now, some of you may be saying to yourselves, but I don't believe that. And here I'd like to bring up a basic concept from our friend Marcus Borg, the concept of fact fundamentalism.
Bible is true and some of it actually.
Right. What does Marcus Borg mean by fact fundamentalism? He means that since the Enlightenment, people generally in the West especially, have gauged what is true by whether it is factual. So people who are not inclined toward religion will look at the stories of religion and say, well, that didn't happen, so it's not true. There's nothing of truth in it because it's made up. People at the other end will say it must be factual for it to be true. And thus they tend to be more literal in their interpretations of stories and doctrines. Marcus Borg, in his brilliance, says there's a vast middle ground where something can be true without being factual. And when we come to the Bible stories and the concept of incarnation, I think we are in that vast middle area where the concept itself is helpful, even if it's not based on something that actually happened. What is that concept? The concept is that God visited us uniquely in Jesus. Marcus Borg himself defines Jesus as, for Christians, the decisive revelation of God. The decisive revelation of God, that in Jesus of Nazareth, the pre-Easter Jesus, there was something unique and true about God that is rarely found walking the earth. And incarnation has broader meanings that we'll go into a little bit today, but from the narrowest sense in the Christian way, this is how the incarnation and the stories of the Bible about the birth of Jesus can be true, even if we don't think they literally happened. So I hope that you will enter into this thinking about incarnation with understanding it as metaphor, understanding it as poetry and art. So I have a video for you from John Philip Newell, and some of you will recognize the name. John Philip Newell is a leading teacher, author, a scholar on Celtic spirituality.
Well, my most significant teacher, mentor, was George MacLeod of Scotland. He was the founder of the modern day Iona community that is doing so much sort of peacemaking work and so much justice focus, not only in the Scottish context but further afield. And his sayings, which I so love, is matter matters, because at the heart of the material is the spiritual. Matter is like this expression. It is a passing expression. There's no doubt matter keeps changing form, but it comes from the world of the soul, or comes from the world of spirit. So that I think that how we handle matter matters, how we handle one another in the matter of relationships, how we handle one another's bodies, how we handle the matter of the earth, what we do to the earth, the matter that we take into ourselves from the earth, how we handle the matter of the holy sovereignty of another nation. All these matters matter because what we're really talking about is how we handle God, or how we handle spirit, how we handle what has come forth from the womb of God. The incarnation.
Yeah, what is that word?
I think it's the becoming fleshness. It's the becoming embodiment. John begins the prologue to his gospel by saying, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." And then he says, everything has come into being through the Word. Everything is essentially an expression or an embodiment of what cannot be seen, what cannot be captured in fixed form. So the incarnation, the story of the incarnation, right at the heart of the Christian household, is an attempt to say that spirit and matter are one, that heaven and earth are one, that the divine and the human are one. And of course, the great tragedy of of how we've used this central story is that we've said, oh, it pertains to one person, Jesus, 2,000 years ago. And I believe that's a tragedy if we limit it to a focus on that one, Jesus, instead of saying that one is at the very heart of our household, precisely because he shows us that this is true of all of us, of everything that has being. We all are embodiment of heaven and earth, divine and human, spirit and matter. So in that sense, Jesus really is revelation, this word that comes from the Latin root revelare, which means to lift the veil. He lifts the veil to show us that we and all things come from the sacred.
That's good news.
It is indeed good news.
This is where incarnation isn't just this narrow Christian crazy idea that God became flesh in Jesus Christ. It's a universal concept that through this Christian idea that God became flesh in Jesus Christ, a whole world opens up of the value of creation, the value of humanity, and how God and the earth and everything in the earth and the universe are really one. That's not just a Christian idea. That's just a wonderful idea. But for Christians, it comes from this Christmas story. But it has universal applications. It's not just limited to Christians. It's not a crazy thing you're supposed to believe to be a Christian. It's a window to see how wonderful life is, how precious life is, and how we are the embodiment of the divine. We, all of us. So if you just consider incarnation as a concept and read those Christmas stories in Luke and Matthew, you have the impression that it's about a God who's all about tenderness, gentleness, and love, beauty, compassion, joy. And I know that the Christian tradition has been hijacked by those who do not behave tenderly. and gently and lovingly. But the story is such a beautiful story. The concept is a wonderful concept that it suggests that that's really the heart of Christianity, is tenderness, gentleness, and love. What does incarnation and the Christmas story tell us about who God is? I came up with these random 7 thoughts here. They're also related to each other. That God is caring, near, intimate, and present. God is far from aloof. God is involved, concerned. God is an intervening God. God is not content to wait, but God intervenes and acts. And God is also not content with the status quo, but a God who will act to do something through us, through creation, through Jesus, who was also flesh, to make a difference in the world. We will sing Hark the Herald Angels Sing a lot this week and beyond. It comes from Charles Wesley, and there's a line in one of those verses, and I'm sorry that it's so patriarchal in language, but the idea is a beautiful idea that God is pleased as man with men to dwell. Jesus, our Emmanuel. That whatever God is on our side for us and wants the very best for us. Not condemnation and judgment and punishment. And that God seeks friendship and relationship with us and is willing to take the risk of becoming human, the risk of emptying God's self. And do some of you remember that 26-year-old song by Joan Osborne, What If God Was One of Us?
Sure.
I actually played this on a Christmas Eve in one church, and that was my last Christmas Eve in that church. But no, not because of that. It's because I was an interim pastor. What if God? And when you're an interim pastor, you can take risks. You know, what are they going to do? Fire you? What if God was one of us, just a slob like one of us, just a stranger on the bus, trying to make his way home? I mean, that's the message of the incarnation, is that God is one of us. And what does the incarnation suggest about who Jesus is? That Jesus is so much one of us that Jesus is the exemplar of humility and vulnerability from his birth until his death. That he enters the world naked and he ends his life naked, a dying man on a cross. And in between, he is always risking himself on behalf of the lost, the last, the least, the outcast of society. And that maybe this is the pattern for Christian life as well. Even Paul, the apostle, says that this is what Christianity is. It's not about power as we usually think of power. It's the kind of unusual power that is expressed through tenderness, gentleness, relationship, and intimacy. And you can read the words of Paul himself. Paul's talking not about Jesus in the manger, but Jesus on the cross. But really, they both suggest the same thing, that real life is received when you're willing to give it away. And that is so Zen-like and countercultural, but it's who Jesus seems to be. And the kind of real life that is suggested is that when we choose foolishness, when we choose weakness, when we choose to identify with that which is low and despised in the world, then we find real life. And because that's who Jesus was. And then Henry Nouwen, I love this little quote from Henry. He refers to his own spiritual life and says, so much in me seeks influence, power, success, and popularity, but the way of Jesus is the way of hiddenness, powerlessness, littleness. It does not seem a very appealing way, yet when I enter into true communion with Jesus, I find that it is this small way that leads to real peace and joy. Some of you are also acquainted with this book, by Marcus Borg and Dom Crossan. It suggests another way that the incarnation and the Christmas story speak to us today and in every age. When Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were written, there was widespread resentment of Rome. The Romans hated the Jewish faith from which Jesus emerged, and they certainly then hated this little movement within Judaism known as the Christian movement. And it was a way that the early church regarded as inhumane, brutal, unjust, where life was of the poor was regarded as cheap and expendable. For the early Christians, they saw in Jesus a message to the contrary. Caesar claimed to be Son of God, the bringer of peace, Lord and Savior of the world. But you hear in the Christmas stories another claim that it's not Caesar and his way who are these things. It's Jesus of Nazareth, who is Son of God, Lord and Savior. And so from the beginning of the Christian faith, Jesus is understood as a critique of the powers that be and an alternative to the powers that be, a way of gentleness, a way of nonviolence, a way of sharing rather than hoarding. Now, it's true that later the Christian church would the Roman Empire would co-opt the Christian church to serve its purposes. But initially, Christianity was an alternative to the power of Caesar. And one of my favorite hymns or carols of the season is O Holy Night. And very often the third verse gets ignored. And sometimes it's not even included in some of the famous recordings of this song. But the third verse is written by an American Unitarian minister just before the Civil War. John Sullivan Dwight was also an abolitionist. And he brought the idea of the incarnation and Christmas right to the major political issue of his day, which was slavery. And he offered these beautiful words. And for me, every time in Christmas season, when I hear the third verse of O Holy Night, I say, this is what the faith is really all about. It's about breaking the chains of oppression. And if it's not about that, I don't know what it is about. Real quickly, we're good with time. I thought you would find this other concept of the incarnation to be helpful. A lot of people assume that Christianity is about Jesus dying on the cross to pay the price or the penalty for our sins so that when we die, we'll go to heaven, right? For a lot of thinking Christians, this is not the most appealing part of Christianity. So there is another way of thinking about the cross of Jesus that really also starts at the incarnation, the birth of Jesus. And it's called divinization. Divinization. And it comes principally from the Eastern Church, from the Orthodox Church. And yet, as Father Richard Rohr says in his devotion today, December 19th, even St. Francis also believed in this understanding of why Jesus is important. Jesus is important to our salvation, not because he died on the cross to pay the penalty for our sins, et cetera, but because in Jesus, God was stooping low to raise us up to our true nature, which is divine, to share in God's glory. Divinization, again, is mostly found in the Orthodox Church, not in the Roman Catholic or the Protestant Church. But it starts with St. Gregory of Nazianzen in the 4th century, And you can read his famous quote here about divinization. The one who is full is made empty, devoid of a while of glory, so that I may share that glory fully. And this is, this is Pastor Luti's comment on that in a recent United Church of Christ daily devotion. Just jump down to the next to last paragraph. She says, her first 4 paragraphs say that if the traditional atonement theology where Jesus died on the cross to pay the penalty for our sin, so when we die, we'll go to heaven, if that doesn't work for you, here's another option. In this verse, it says, God empties out to take humanity in. God stoops down to raise us up. God accepts limits to dissolve the limits that made it seem as if God and humans were opposites. The great wonder of the incarnation, she says, is that we're not what? Not opposites. We're not opposed to God. We're not separate from God. The incarnation says we are one with God and one with all things. And then she concludes by saying, if you believe this, then what you're waiting for in Advent is not someone to fix us, but someone to reveal us to ourselves, namely our divine nature. So that's what I have for you, except I do have a closing 3-minute reflection on the incarnation. I'm going to stop screen sharing for now. By the way, we don't have spiritual enrichment the next 2 Sundays, but we will gather at this time and this place on January 9th. I do want to reserve time at the end for this 3-minute reflection on the incarnation, which is really lovely. But first, what are your thoughts about the meaning of the incarnation, this Christian concept, Christian and Hindu concept? Does it sing in your spirit in some way?
Yes, it does.
Say more.
God is within all of us, and we all must behave as God wishes us to behave, to love each other, to be kind, and to bring equality to this world. I like the concept of lifting up for us to make ourselves better.
Well, divinization is really, it's about waking us up to our true identity, our sacred, holy identity as sentient beings.
Isn't that what heaven on earth means?
Yes, that's right. Divinization relocates heaven from outer space to within every person and in everything.
Jeff Bezos is going to be disappointed in one.
I think it's interesting because I think the way we've been taught as children is that God is out there someplace. This separation of God is someplace else other than us. And to think about it as combined is really very powerful. And I wonder what that means to children if we would teach children that from the very beginning.
That's a really cool idea.
Absolutely.
That's a really cool idea.
I think it's a
Have
very
to start a new
powerful.
church.
Pardon?
We'll have to start a new church.
Well, I think I've always said it's very powerful from a psychological perspective.
I agree.
As for you to see yourself as divine and see yourself as positive from a positive perspective rather than being born in sin. I mean, what does that do for us? To be born in sin.
Yeah.
You're starting out from a negative perspective, but if you say it the opposite way, you're starting out life from a very positive perspective.
That's right, it removes
No,
the
no, I-
guilt.
You remove the guilt.
And,
And
you
so it
know,
makes you more powerful in terms of what you can do, I think.
yes, there's less reason to divide anybody, any things in the world. We're all in this together. God is right here, right now. And not to get full of ourselves about it, because this little peasant baby is as vulnerable as anybody. So if I
That's
start
powerful,
thinking,
that
if I start
vulnerability.
telling other people, you know, to believe what I believe, or preaching, or thinking that I'm, you know, God, well, that just defeats the purpose. Because the Taoistic side, as Jeffrey was saying, of it, in our, you know, in our weakness is the power.
Right.
That's the opposite of Christ is on the cross. And we owe it to him to be better. It's like we are being held hostage by these preachers. And it's, I mean, who wants that?
Lots of people.
Yeah.
That's the point.
It's easy, it's simple.
Yes, but it's not that simple, right, Paul?
Well, no, it shouldn't be. I agree, but what you're saying is the traditional image of Christ saving us from our sins is simple. It's what people can buy into and give money to.
It's also external.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree, but it's also.
It's much more difficult if you realize that you have to make personal decisions as to what is good and not good.
Right.
As
In the
opposed to
world.
someone else making them for you. Because
Excellent.
it's challenging.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
we have good instincts and we have not so good instincts, and we need to be able to judge between the two.
What a great segue from last week, right? I mean, I think we are Niebuhrians. We're not Billy.
Froze.
They have frozen up.
It's just us.
Oh, and I was so enticed by the phrase, we are Niebuhrians, not Billy Grammars. I was waiting to get that fuller explanation. That's very provocative.
Yeah, right. Well, I hope that's not the end of our link. Oh, they're gone.
Oh, that's too bad.
But I'm the host, so I'm going to assume that they can come back in and I can admit them.
They're moving now.
There they are. We had a little hiccup there.
But they're on mute.
waving.
They're on mute.
Oh, Patty, can you unmute them, please?
Okay, sorry.
All right. Are we back? Are we all back to? There was a hookup, a hiccup somewhere there.
Just all the best ideas.
Speaking of our limits,
It's not power.
quickly so this idea of theosis or divinization is a very common idea in the Orthodox Church. But I paint the picture that the Orthodox have a role for Good Friday in their theology. Not at all. Rather, Good Friday, Jesus on the cross, is understood as the fullest expression of God's solidarity with humanity. Because God is willing to go to such an extent to remind us of our divine nature that God is willing to take on not only a body, but all that a body might endure, humiliation and death and injustice. And in that way, again, it's about identification, that God identifies with humanity so that human beings will identify with God and say, we have a God who cares. We have a God who is one of us. And that this is at its clearest expression, not really on Christmas, but on Good Friday. But the two go together. They echo one another. We have maybe a minute before I want to show you this little closing clip. Anybody at home, my fellow home Zoom union members want to offer a thought here about incarnation?
One of the covenant at the church that Bill and I used to go to, a Unitarian church, was very simple, and it's a mantra that helps me kind of think about how to live. And it's love is the spirit of this church and service is its law. This is our great covenant to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. It's very simple and it's very easy for me to remember. I can't remember everything, but that I can remember.
That's lovely, Andrea. Thank you. Yeah. And for Christians, I mean, Jesus is that.
Right. I mean, it's not anti-Christian. Unitarian,
No.
it's just, that's a very simple way to sum it up, I thought.
Yeah. And for Christians, Jesus is that in human form for 33 years at least.
Yeah.
I would like to conclude now with this lovely contemplative video called I Am With You.
In our pain, our blue, our beautiful, our hard, our messy, our ugly, our struggles and our joys. God is with us. God accompanying us. God alongside us. God amid us. God among us. God beside us. God by us. God including us. God near us. God plus us. God upon us. God as companion to us. God side by side us. God in the thick of us. In the thick of our humanity. In the middle of this weary world. God is with us. In the gift and in the muck and mire of real life, we are called to be present, to be in the flesh with one another, accompanying others, alongside others, amid others, beside others, by others, for others, including others, near others, a companion to others, side by side with others, in the thick of others. God with us with others. God with the world in the thick of the beautiful and the messy. In that, a weary world rejoices.
Okay, friends, we're at time. Just want to wish you all a real blessed Christmas and Happy New Year. Anything else for the good of the community to be said?
Jeffrey, I thank you for that. And right now, it's really hard when we can't really be with others to do those things.
Yeah.
And this is why I think so many people are having trouble by now.
Yeah.
With this virus. And good luck this afternoon when you get your test.
Thank you.
Personally, we have to be careful daily. We can't slip off. I am invited to Hackney's this afternoon to hear that Glendale South Dickinsonian chorus. One of my former students is in, and the family is picking me up, and I'm thinking twice about this.
Right. Yeah. And so we will strive and overcome whatever barriers there are so we can continue to be together in whatever way we can. Yeah. I want to thank Patty Van Cleve and also Edgar, our custodian, for helping today. And you all have a blessed Christmas.